Hello everyone. Sorry, this is me and Karla, hoping we're not going to fall off these stools. Sorry. If we do, will you please be nice? We're both a bit uncertain about this. Hello everyone. Welcome to the Fruitmarket. I'm Fiona Bradley. I'm the director here. It's very exciting. It's very exciting. First time this year that I've seen a live audience in the Fruitmarket. So thank you all for coming. That's lovely. And obviously a huge thanks to you, Karla, for coming to do this. It's a really weird thing, I'm aware of that, to ask an artist to talk about another artist's work in the context of your own work. I'm aware it's a really strange thing. I'll just give a little bit of a rationale about why we're doing this. Obviously, Karla and I have worked with each other a few times now. In Venice, for Scotland in Venice, in 2011, goodness me, and the exhibition that reopened the Fruitmarket. In this very room, on this very floor, you can see its very scars and residues, which I love. The exhibition that made its mark here in 2021. More than that, though, I think, I've been talking to you about sculpture, about understanding more how art works. By talking to you and looking at your work and thinking about work with you. You are, I'm going to really embarrass Karla now, but you are one of the most visually intelligent and actually intelligent artists whose work I've ever looked at and I've ever talked with. And I think there's something about what your work does that cuts right to the heart of what art is for. That's why it's your work that reopened the Fruitmarket. For me, it's everything that I want art to be. And in the course of these conversations that we've had over years, particularly in lockdown, particularly at that moment when you're in my case, in your study, looking at everything on screen and wondering if we were ever going to get out and we were ever going to get into the material world, ever get into this building and into this material world. And talking to you put that kind of space that only sculpture can put into my brain. And a lot of it, in those conversations, Barry LeVay kept coming up. And I didn't know his work very well. Not that I told you that. I'm like, oh yeah, Barry LeVay, absolutely. And then Google frantically and work out, what it is I think I know about this artist. And doing this show of Barry LeVay was a way to find stuff out, was a way to find out. We had the opportunity to do the show. Very similarly, actually, the curator of the Kunstmuseum in Liechtenstein, who have a big collection of Barry LeVay's work, and I've worked with her before when we did the show of Bill Bollinger, and before that, Fred Zambach. She said, I'd like to do Barry LeVay, and I'm like, oh yeah, no, me too. She said, oh great, because hardly anyone knows his work. I'm like, I do, or more precisely, Karla Black does, or has excited me about the work, and that is why, one of the reasons we did the show, and that's why I've asked you to come and do this talk, even though I know it's quite mean to ask you to talk about another artist's work anyway, and this particular artist in particular. But Karla and I are going to talk for about 45 minutes, if we don't fall off the stools, and then there will be time for questions. So do ask questions at the end. Whether either of us will be able to answer them about Barry LeVay is a moot point, but Karla will certainly be able to talk about her own work. And then after the talk, Karla very kindly has said that you'll sign copies of your extraordinary book. I was reading this yesterday and realizing that almost everything that I say about Karla, you could pretty much say about Barry LeVay. And everything you say about your own work is a really, really useful lens through which to look back at Barry LeVay. So I would urge you, if you haven't read it for a while, to read it and have another scoot through the show. It's extraordinary. But anyway, that's the plan. I hope it works. We've got some slides, so we'll be bouncing through some of Barry's work and some of Karla's work. But first of all, Karla, I know I've put you completely on the spot. I've fessed up to the fact that I think before doing the show, I hadn't seen in the flesh a single work of Barry LeVay. How about you? What did you see? What did you know?
But yet also, neither had I. And so really I've only seen his work in magazines and books, mostly in the Glasgow School of Art library, That's where I got really into his work. And
Can we have the first slide so we can see the kind of things?
And really, until I've seen this show, which I saw a few weeks ago, I had never actually seen any of his work in real life either.
So and that's so interesting, isn't it? That lodges. So what would you have?
But I had thought, that he was quite a sort of niche, 60s, 70s artist, and there's lots of artists, even people like Robert Smithson, Robert Morris, like Eva Hess, like loads of work that I'd only ever seen in magazines, really, in books, and like taking black and white photocopies of, like, in the art school.
Because that's so interesting, isn't it? We're not talking Googling Barry LeVay, are we?
No, well, no, I never had. I guess I had seen him, before that, like, as part of my education at art school, and then it was just probably part of, like, living in Glasgow at that time as well. Like, I'd never seen much in the flesh, you know. I hadn't seen a lot of exhibitions, and I don't know, like you had said, I didn't even know if Barry LeVay had been exhibited in Britain.
No, I mean, I think,
before I was born, yes. I think 1971 in London, the year before I was born. So I don't think I had the opportunity.
I mean, there's probably some experts in the audience, in which case you can just put us right and say that there's lots of work of Barry LeVay's that you've seen. But as far as I know, it was this show, which was actually 69. I thought it was the 69, which was in the Nigel Greenwood Gallery in London. No, in the Nigel Greenwood Gallery in London in 1971, where Nigel Greenwood had hired a warehouse and Barry LeVay had put out some lines of, I think, flour.
Chalk, I think
chalk
it's
or
chalk.
flour.
Yeah,
One of them was chalk, the other was flour. And then got this. Tell me of what you know about this, because you've thought about this work, I know.
Yeah, just that he would put out these lines of chalk dust, and then he had an air compressor machine that he starts from the back forward. If you imagine, like, you see the line that you see here at the front would be the last one done. Obviously, it's like mopping yourself out of a room,
which you know so much about, of course.
But so he would just put out a line of chalk dust and then walk along it with his air compressor machine to sort of blow it all forward. In each line he would move backwards out of the room, so you get a sort of sense of like a wind blown landscape or waves, or so it's very sort of like, when I make a floor work, for example, using powder, it's usually pretty solid all over, but these are like such a thin layer, like in between the lines, that are just the sort of blown particles. And it's sort of almost like it's like what ice does or what sand does in the wind. Like, it just has those beautiful sort of shapes and surfaces that are so, the edges of which are so sort of fragile, like a sort of lunar landscape almost, I think.
I mean, that even that, just you saying that, and it speaks so clearly, I think, to what he says. You're talking about what sand does, what ice does. You're not talking about what it looks like. You're talking about what it does, and then we get to what it looks like. And is that what, when you look at that, you're thinking, how did he do that? What did he do?
I suppose, like, it's quite interesting to me that he's so thinking about how I came to the work then in a library or something, looking at images, when it's like this really sort of material, physical work, which I would love to see. And I know that recently that work was recreated at Dia Beacon in New York State. Obviously, I didn't see it there, and it's not permanent. Like, I think a couple of years before he died, he put out 4 or 5 of his more sort of materially fragile sculptures, and I had hoped that it would be, a permanent installation there. There's quite a few artists who have like a number of their works permanently on display at Dia Beacon, but excuse me, it turns out it's not. It was just an exhibition, I think. But he said, what Barry LeVay himself said was that he thought that galleries should be more like libraries, and that you shouldn't go to a gallery to look at artwork, or you should go to a gallery to find out about art and to find out information about art, rather than just look at it. So I thought that was quite that's not what I think. It's
I don't think we agree with him, do we?
It's a totally different. And also don't know if it's whether you would agree or not. If you know what I mean, it's completely appropriate for his work and what he does, or something. So I have like a great appreciation of that. I would just have like a different attitude towards that or something, or the way that I make work is quite different. But I think
it's one of the interesting things, I suppose, about that is you think that libraries are there to preserve things, and libraries are there in perpetuity, and they're something that looks after something. And everything that Barry LeVay's work does is try and destroy spaces and try and take them apart and threaten them, which you don't really associate with libraries. Let's perhaps have the next slide, and we can talk about that.
Although he is accused of that,
I mean, so are you. So this is why I want to talk about it.
You know, he said, you know, one of the reasons why he had to move from LA to New York was because he wasn't fitting in there. But anytime he, you know, showed his work or images to a gallerist, they would say to him, you're trying to destroy the gallery and not want to show it. I don't think that's what he thought he was doing, you know. But for example, not that one, but there's one of the most exciting exhibitions he ever had was probably one of the first exhibitions that he ever had at the Walker Art Centre. And that piece of work is made from broken glass, iron oxide, dust and mineral oil. There might be some other powders in it, but iron oxide dust is it's rust. It's just powdered rust. So of course we don't even have any coloured photographs of this work, and it would have, I presume, have either been very sort of red or orange or brown, I think. But he was only ever able to make this piece of work at all, and I think it went throughout 4 rooms in the Walker Art Centre, but it's because they were tearing it down, so they let him do that before the building came down, because I think the iron oxide and the mineral oil would just like eat through the floor. So it's not really reproducible, that one. No one's gonna see it. No one's even gonna see a colour photograph of it. So I suppose it's more, you think about, it's like hearing about someone's sort of scientific experiments or something. It has to, I just think he's much more of a sort of inspiration or something. He's an inspirational artist, like especially for young people, I think, and art students, to remember, you know, what creativity really is, or something, to experiment and to not. He didn't think that art galleries should sell work or be commercially. He had this idea that they should be more like libraries where you find out information about art. And shall I talk a little bit about how he first came to the epiphany of
that would be lovely.
Making this sort of work? So he says that he was at art school in LA, and he'd done his sort of undergraduate degree in the late 60s. I think by 1966 he was starting on his, what do they call it in America, graduate school. And he was painting, so he was a painter to begin with, and at this time he was painting like cartoons, painting and drawing cartoons on canvas, and it was a time of like pop art, basically. He felt that he had no freedom in his painting. He wanted to find out who he was. He felt that he couldn't find out who he was as a painter within the sort of limits of painting, because it was all so full of the imagery of pop art at that time. What he wanted to do was like to sort of try and find himself, find who he was and what he could do, and he wanted to go back to zero, as a lot of the artists at that time did. You know, there's plenty of experimentation happening and sort of deconstruction of painting and sculpture. So he started to just cut up his canvases, and he made them into 3-dimensional objects in relation to each other in a room. Now there's no images of that. That's just something he says. It's happening at art school. No one's going to see photographs of that work. They don't exist, I don't think. And so he, as he did that, one thing that probably comes back into his work later is the fact that he had been sort of drawing and painting all these cartoons, and there was a lot of sort of physical moments within those, as there are in cartoons, like
descriptions of representation,
like a brick going through a window, someone knocking a wall down, whatever, an explosion, a sort of kapow, like all those, you know, you can imagine those sort of 1960s comic book images. But once he'd done that, he sort of looked down at the floor and just saw the threads and the tiny bits of canvas that were the residue of what he had made. And I think that was his epiphany, basically just looking at that to say, oh no, that's what it is. This isn't zero, that's zero. That's how I go back to nothing to start again. And he then was just using lots of cut up canvas, making these sort of dispersed works. Like, you know, Robert Morris and his felt works, people, especially within the art world, they tend to call it sort of scatter art or scatter works, but he's saying, no, it's not that. These are sculptures, you know, these are individual sculptures. And he, you know, canvas is really thick and it's difficult, and he was putting a lot of work into it, and he had a friend, I can't remember her name, like a female friend that he talks about who was at art school with him, and she was making these big felt banners, and she was just like, what are you doing? Why are you using canvas? Like, if you want to do this, I'll take you to the fabric shop. And she would buy like these big sort of rolls of felt, and then that's how he got into using felt, which is really his signature material for all these sort of, however you want to describe, sort of dispersed sculpture works.
So it's so interesting then that he's going from representations of violence, essentially, or depictions of violence, to actually doing violence to his depictions of violence, cutting them up, and then using those. Yeah. And I guess later on, one of the things he would say is don't look for meaning in the work particularly. Look for the traces of action. Look for what I've done. Look for what the work has done, rather than don't look for symbolism or meaning in that way.
And then I think even before he gets there, before you can do that, you know, when he talks about sort of returning to zero, as a lot of these artists did, it has to be, for him, one, it's the ground, the floor is zero, that sort of horizontality, but also materials, like reducing them down to taking them apart into particles, as is like everything is just sort of atomized. You know, chalk, plaster, flour, but all the powders, and the iron oxide
powders, and we're going to go through the next 3 slides. So we've got 2 of Karla's. So just hold on that for a moment. So we're going to go back to Barry Levay in a minute, but I just want us to think powders and dispersal. So this is you from the upstairs gallery in 2021. Yeah. I'm not going to ask you to say the title of the work. It's not on there.
It's there. Oh, it's not on there.
It's not on there.
It's called Punctuation is Pretty, Popular, Nobody Wants to Admit to Much.
There you go.
That's what it's called.
That's what it's called.
And then it's recreated from maybe 2014, was it? Or no,
so.
Before, I can't remember before that. It's a piece of work from about, let me think about it, 2008 or 9, then recreated in 2021.
And this, I wanted to show this work, and then we've got another detail of it before we go back to Barry Levay, just because everything that I want to ask you about sculpture and materials and atomization and time is embedded in this work, I think. And it was a work of extreme jeopardy. How you made it is extremely, I couldn't believe how you made it. That you spend all this time throwing, well, you can tell us, but the way the cotton came into it, I just think is extraordinary, this work. Tell us about how the work is made, briefly.
And also, maybe before I just speak a tiny bit about the floor and the horizontal as well, and how, so, you know, art history, Western art history wants to sort of say that it begins probably with, in 1966, with, like, you know, someone like James Mayer, wrote the book on minimalism, or whatever, would say and said in his sort of interview that he did with Barry for that Dia Beacon show, that, oh, you were the first person to work on the floor like that, to work horizontally, and it was only you, in 1966, it was only you and Karl Andre. Okay, so just that, obviously that's not true, and you know, it's really easy to sort of erase out a lot of stuff, like Linda Benglis, Eva Hesse, both from 1969.
They've got something in common, haven't they? I wonder if that's something to do with why they've been erased.
They're making work on the floor. Robert Smithson is before him. He's in the late 50s, and you know, Robert Morris's continuous project Altered Dailies 1969. So it's just all, you know, David Hammonds is doing like really amazing stuff. Sam Gilliam's deconstructing paint, and there's a lot of things. And Amendieta by the very early 70s is like lying out on the landscape on the ground. And also we have to think about like other cultures and ancient works and works that have come before, like the Australian Aborigines, and even I think of land art like the Benin walls, and it's not like
Barry LeVay didn't invent the floor
in 1966 and him and Carl Andre you know, were the first ever human beings to make a sort of be creative on the ground or the floor. But I don't know, it's really hard to, for me, I suppose I will say that you know, sculpture is most interesting to me when it admits within itself that the object is a fallacy. And that just means that my work is pictorially abstract in the traditional sense, but also it's materially abstract, I think, which means that as well as it doesn't work itself up into a face or a figure or a landscape, it also materially doesn't work itself up into like structure or permanence or, you know, perhaps even form, like a lot of the time. And I suppose what I mean when I say the object is a fallacy is just that, you know, material in the world and in the universe is only ever, you know, sort of flying together or flying apart. It is particulate, it's atomized, and it's only really our, like, limited human experience of time that allows us to see any sort of permanence in an object or a sculpture.
I've loved that for a long time. You saying that, I think, really speaks to me that we, you know, matter is moving apart and together very slowly, and what we're seeing is a snapshot in time. I have to say it wasn't really until watching Barry LeVay speak in the film that we've got upstairs, when he speaks about the Muybridge galloping horse. I don't know if any of you have watched the film. I would urge you to do so. He talks about the animation that Muybridge did of a horse galloping, and when you see the whole animation, the whole film, you see the horse galloping. Yeah. If you just isolate one frame, you see a horse with all its legs tucked underneath it. You have no idea what's going on, and what you see is a permanent thing. And that, for me, is a really easy way of trying to understand what you have to say there, that matter is always flying apart and flying together.
And it's kind of, I mean, it's different with the horse, I suppose.
Yes.
But if you're thinking about an object, sort of, it's like energy equals mass equals energy equals it just like, you know, and so it's interesting to think about the amount of energy everyone does. All artists are putting, you know, it's a human interaction with materials that makes for a work of art. But I guess he's trying to sort of deconstruct it and make it obvious when you think about the piece of work that he made when he's actually running from wall to wall and smashing himself into the wall, or when you think about the action with the sledgehammer to break the glass, or the way he throws the, what do you call, like the cleaver?
The cleavers.
When he throws the cleavers into the walls, it's very, very sort of physical. There's a lot of energy that goes into that, and also so is my work. It's like, it's a huge scale, and it's real sort of physical labour, and
because you do it by yourself. Your work tends to be what
sometimes, I mean, not always,
not
but
all the powder, but the cotton reels are thrown in by you. Things are thrown up according. We've got residue all around us in the warehouse of where your reach is. And And do you think there's something that speaks to you of Barry LeVay's work like that he's measuring himself, running backwards and forwards across the room? Is there something like
and
that?
It's just that for him, I think that work is reducing, like, you know, an artist to their sort of kind of base, which is just like, do this for as long as you can do it until you can't do it anymore. You know, that's sort of what, but any work is like that. That's work, isn't it? That's sort of like, what your physical body can do in the
there is an
world
urge
until
to-
it can't
yeah.
anymore.
There's an
Yeah.
urge to do it, to find out if you can do it, or want to find something out by doing it.
Well, I think it's like, obviously, there is you can't really sort of, it's really hard to sort of say one thing, oh, this is what art is. There's an element of it. Not all art is like that. His work is really interesting because it's so conceptual as well. It's almost pure conceptual art in some regard. But for me, you would think it's labour, you know, it's work.
Yeah. If we, Matt, can we just have the next slide and then the slide after? So we go through, so that's a overall shot of the upper gallery looking probably the most beautiful it's ever going to look. And then we're back here to this work, which, again, I had known about that he worked with chalk and that he'd worked in this way. This on the right is this piece in the gallery here, and on the left is a vintage, a photograph of it. Talk to us about this work, this chalk piece. Do you recognise it? Does it speak to you when you look at it? Do you recognise it? What does it make you? You know that you've worked with this material. You know what it is. You know.
Yeah, I mean, when I
works.
make powder floor works now, I work with plaster. It's like plaster
But you
powder,
did
which
work,
isn't very different.
You did
But
work
I
with chalk and
started-
flour, like him.
Yeah,
You started
there
there.
is sort of really interesting thing about chalk, probably in various different people's practices, being that a lot of the time it sort of comes from childhood as well and from school. But I think and to think about what it actually is really interesting as well. One thing is that it's powdered, it's atomized, it's, you know, it's material, you know, in a sort of pulverized form, as close to nothing maybe as you can get as well to build from. And when I started making, I think I didn't know, like I knew that he used flour and I used flour when I was at art school. I think I didn't really know that he used chalk. I think I wasn't totally sure what it was. And then when I first started using powder in my work, I was smashing up chalks from the early learning centre and putting them through a sieve or getting all these different colours. And it took me, I'm so stupid, you know, like sometimes when you know, trying to sort of like forge your own path in art making, like you can do some pretty dumb things as well. And I, for 3 years or something, did that until I realised that perhaps you could buy powdered chalk. You know, so I used to smash it up with a hammer. It's so exhausting, like it's something mad and try and fill a room, or I was doing that and then like pushing it through a sieve, like until I realised I could do it. Then I realised that powder paint is chalk, and I was like, oh.
I mean,
and then I mixed it with plaster powder to, you know, get the colours that I wanted. It's just like mixing paint, I suppose, to get these really sort of light colours that I wanted. But also, I think for him, like that sort of him wanting to go back to zero and sort of reducing materials down to their absolute essence and then just using them on the floor. I mean, he wasn't allowed to make the piece of work that he wanted to make for his graduate show because his tutors said his sculpture must have a pedestal. And he wasn't allowed to present those sort of felt works that he was making. It took for him to have the exhibition, I think, the next year in LA for him to be able to do that. And I guess I thought that as well. Yeah, a sculpture is something that stands up by itself. But I suppose, like, you just sort of, can challenge that the minute you say, well, is it? Yeah. And then you try to, but I think...
also, your sculpture does stand up by itself.
Sometimes,
that stands up by it can be very low and stand up by itself.
And so that's true, that is standing up, that's true. Yeah, it's just...
just not very high.
If you were to measure it, it has some sort of height.
Yes.
Yeah. But I think to think about what chalk is and what plaster is really interesting as well. It's just completely natural material that comes out. The chalk comes out of the sea, and it's the crushed up skeletons of dead old sea creatures, you know. Plaster is sort of similar. It comes out of the ground, and the fact that it's white as well, just to take all the colour out of it and to reduce the material down to almost nothing and to start again. That's what they're trying to do in the 60s and 70s. They're trying to sort of start again. But there's also a really good story about Helen Frankenthaler and a piece of chalk. As I think chalk, because it is so sort of basic and primitive, and we've always had it as a human species. Like, I think there's chalk in cave drawings, and it's interesting that we all use it as children as well. The powderiness of it is quite a sort of exquisite sort of material experience, and the fact that it can turn to dust and it can fly around in the air and the light. But Helen Frankenthaler, when she was because she was quite sort of rich, I think, quite well from a well-off family. She had a nanny as a little kid, but she sort of recognised her own sort of willfulness and creativity, but more so like that, ability to commit to the sort of hard labour, to be really willful, to never give up in sort of physical space. That her nanny took her to the park and took her home before she wanted to go home. She's about 3, and she put a piece of chalk on the ground and drew, the whole way home, like however many, 20 blocks or something, made a drawn line of chalk from the park, 20 blocks, like all the way home, and then sort of realised to herself how willful she was and how stubborn. But it's just quite, also around this time, she's making these like amazing sort of pour paintings that her processes, even though they end up on the wall, she's making them on the floor. So I think that's some sort of combination of material, human behaviour in the physical world. And then I guess, you talked about, did you talk about violence again?
Not yet. Yes, we did. Yeah, we can talk more about it. Shall we, let's move from the chalk. I think we've got another image of him pouring a chalk line. Again, action, what he's done. And the Nigel Green Gallery. Then we've got him with felt, which we talked a little bit about. And we've got another felt. And perhaps we'll go on to the next slide, and then we can talk about violence for the next couple of slides. I spent a lot of my time saying that his work isn't necessarily about violence, but let's talk about it, because it is.
Yeah,
obviously.
I mean, before we talk, it's sort of the same thing to talk about sort of physicality and work or something, which is like, there's a time around this time, in the 60s and 70s, when the working classes, and especially working class men, via probably like Jackson Pollock or something, come back in to the art world, even though there was a time, in ancient times, it was a craft, and a person was an artisan, and they were a tradesperson, but then like someone like, it became rarefied sort of in the Western world, and then all these people started sort of smashing it apart again in New York, really specifically living, they're almost like sort of mechanics, or like wearing sort of boiler suits and doing really physical work, because it's like in their families to do that sort of physical work, and to be filthy, and to work on the ground. There's a really interesting thing, there's this novel which I read recently by Alison Lurie called Real People. Oh, yeah. Have you read that? It's really good. It's like set in a sort of when would you say it was set? It's this time. It's like the 60s, 70s, but it's a sort of artist residency in this big kind of fancy ancestral home in upstate New York, I think, that's been handed over to the arts, and they have these artist residencies there. But it is a really nice composition of, like, it's a real crossover when the people's, abstract expressionism starts to come in. People start to smash up the genteel,
very ungenteel
art forms. And someone had said, why do all these artists look like they work, they're workers, like they work down a mine, or they're like a mechanic or something? And someone said, because they are, because that's what they are. But yes, so... I mean,
this, I suppose, one of the things that I love about this slide on the left here is that you have one of the most beautiful drawings you're ever going to see. I think this six-part drawing in front of the glass sculpture, and all the drawing is instructions of how to smash up the glass. that you lay one sheet, you smash it up, you lay another sheet, you smash it up, you lay another sheet, you smash it up, you leave the last one. It's just instructions of how to be a labourer, basically, and it is, in its own terms, I think, intensely beautiful.
But the sort of trying to talk about violence a bit and tie it back to his process or something, like he doesn't think of it like that. Well, he said, like, when people see the cleavers thrown into the wall, that looks like an act of violence to them. His intent in that and his feeling about that work is that it's not violent, that it's really sort of meditative and peaceful. And then, but he thinks that the running work, where he's smashing himself against the walls and keeping going till he can't do it anymore, that is violent, that one. But I suppose when you think about, he also, for him, he talks so much about clues, okay? He talks so much about Sherlock Holmes, which is quite funny, but I think it's not the literature of that, it's not the story. It's like he said, you know, unlike myself, that's really different from me, but he sort of has a plan, which is why it is conceptual art, you know? It's really on the line there between sort of conceptual art, minimalism, process art, anti-form, whatever, sculpture in the expanded field, like performative. But he often gives himself sets of instructions to do things. The drawings are, you know, he shows those, they become those drawings or pieces of written work, which are really like pieces of conceptual art that we're used to from that time. But he had said that he wants people to, the closest thing you can sort of just, you know, compare it to is a crime scene. I think it's really sort of almost sort of like CSI. He wants you to, you know, go into the room, he's left you a series of clues. What has happened here? And he does want you to try and find out what has happened here, and physically what has happened here and what's happened to these materials and how has this been made to be like this, and to try to sort of unearth that deep truth. Sometimes I think, you know, a lot of artists are obsessed by sort of detective stories or almost solving crimes, like Elaine de Kooning and William de Kooning were really into like reading the detective stories in New York Magazine, like really addicted to that.
And haven't you had a phase of...
I've had a phase of that, which we won't talk about. And Barry LeVay is really into Sherlock Holmes. So, yeah, that's my lockdown
phase. Yeah. But, I remember talking about clues and murder mysteries with you. Yeah.
But so he wants you to... He said that, because lots of artists will say, you have your own intention, but you don't necessarily need other people to try and work out what that is or something. It's just like, you know, my work is really open, and it's the person in my work is the person looking at it. Really, it's like there's nothing to work out about it. It's a sort of experience for people. It belongs to them. But he said that he really wanted people to come in the room. You do have your initial experience of the work, but he felt like he really wanted you to try to work out what exactly has this guy done in here. What's he done? How has this all happened? And he thought that if you can't, you have to do that, or you can't understand the work, you know. And then he said later on, perhaps I expected too much of people, you know. But it's interesting. I have no opinion of it. It's interesting to me that he thought like that.
It's interesting though, isn't it? 'Cause I think one of the things that I would do faced with a sculpture that I don't understand is not necessarily think, what has he done or she done, what has the artist done, but what is the sculpture doing there? What is it right there? And maybe it's a close thing. So, okay, to say what is that, right, that glass is broken, it's not all broken, the top isn't broken, and you do start to think, right, how has he made it? And maybe it is actually quite a useful way.
Because I don't think it's as static as that. It's like for him, I don't think the sculpture or the object exists outside of the energy and the event that made it. In his work, it doesn't really sort of elevate itself to the point of then being something else that you can walk away from. Like he's still, which means it's a little bit more like a crime or a crime scene. Like this has happened. Someone's done something. They're not here anymore. What happened? Whereas there's other pieces of work. My work, it doesn't matter what happened.
No.
It's more like aesthetically, and a lot of things have happened. There's a bit of that, like action in it. But it's more just very sort of aesthetically, formally what is there. But I don't think this is that. I think it's because it has its roots so firmly in conceptual art. And I think you do all have to think of it as very much of its time as well. And all of that work when they're trying to sort of get back to zero, smash it all up. I don't think there are, you know, there's gestural artists in there, some, but, well, it's more the performance art of the time. Say, like, I would think something like this comes out of, like, Viennese Actionism, the High Red group from, like, Japan, Fluxus, you know, a lot of, like, feminist performance art that's happening at the time. Carly Schneeman's probably a little bit further on. But I think they don't, you have to think, you know, I don't think they could just step out. So they're stepping off a cliff. By the time it gets to my generation or even the generation before me, though I don't know how many generations there are between him and me, maybe one or two. But you have to say, I think it has to be justified at that time, which is a lot of the reason why it becomes really conceptual and very academic, and you have a lot of sort of language and plan in it, almost things like, you know, he talked about when he would sort of make a plan, it was sort of like a musical score. He would try to follow it, and then he would try to possibly improvise within it, but these can't be taken separately from the instructions. They can't be taken away from the drawings or the musical score, because I feel it's almost like a sort of justification because it's the first step. It has that you know, there's a lot of like inability to, you couldn't be seen to not be thinking about it, for example, whereas I feel like and that's why he comes out of painting into sculpture like that, into the room, and he feels his freedom there. And I feel like I come out of sculpture going back towards painting in my process, like compositionally, because for me there's more freedom there. In something like high modernism, when you have like the first abstraction that's really purely aesthetic and about you know, just relationship of form to colour to material, they can't do that at this time, I don't think.
Just, with so much in there. What you just said, can we just have the next slide? Because there is, so this is the shots at the end of a glass line. I just want to go through that very quickly, which seems to me only just not performance. You know, as in that way that, as you say, he's just stepped away. Something's happened. Somebody's shot a revolver down that pipe, left the shots in the wall, and left the room.
And I suppose that his work, which I don't know what it's called, I have to look at the title, like the running one.
The running one is
it's very
Velocity
early,
Piece. It's Velocity Piece, I think it's called.
And it's performance.
It is a performance.
And all that exists in
Although
it
he
is
says
audio.
it isn't a performance.
Oh, he said it's okay. Right.
Which I love, because I think you and I have talked about performance and whether you're early, you know, how much performance is retained in your work when it's made by you, and again, just stepped away. There is something about
Velocity
that.
Piece, Impact Run, 1969. So it's just audio?
Except they've lost the audio.
Oh, great.
Okay. So this is a piece where he runs backwards and forwards, smacking himself against the wall of about as length as this. There's some images of people listening to it, and there's in the vitrine upstairs, there's some drawings of him laying it out, but the actual sound has been lost. And he ran for as long as he could. He thought it was going to be really easy, I understand, but he ran for as long as he could physically smack his head against the wall. It was about an hour and 10 minutes, something like that, I think he lasted. But anyway. Yeah. But so that, in our sense, we would understand that as performance. And what's left documentation. Here we're not looking at documentation, we're looking at something else.
This one's really odd to me.
It is odd, isn't it?
Yeah. What's the title?
It's called Shots to the End of a Glass Line. So the line,
Yeah,
I think what he said, so the shots, the bullet fired is a straight line. The only way to, at this point before lasers, the only way to make a straight line through the air is with a gun. So the revolver shots are the straight line into the end of the pipe. And the glass line, the serpentine glass line, is more like a line in nature, a natural line. What he was after was an unnatural line, but I don't really know why.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird that it's not and I guess it comes out of the glass pieces, and I also know, like, it's not even really physically possible to make a good straight line out of shards of glass. No. He does call it a line. I think this work sort of stands out as being a bit of an anomaly in his oeuvre, really, and it's very conceptual. A lot of his work is. I mean, how would you? I guess this relates to. There's probably more interesting work than it as well, in terms of, like, so it's from instruction. Yeah. So, and there's a lot of drawings that go with it. They're sort of part of the work. But it's like, can you describe, the piece of work that he made with the bricks? And it's
if we have the next slide, I think it's in the background there. These 3 drawings are about the works he made with the bricks, the 3 on top of each other.
Yeah.
So this is him in Rolf Ricker's gallery, pacing out the floor, dropping a brick at a particular angle to make a particular drawing. So it's the action makes the drawing. And I think a similar thing is going on in the big drawing on the left. It's mapping out of some kind of action or some kind of spatial thing. So all of the works in this room are about the body in motion, really, him walking around.
But it's almost like, again, it's like to try to work out what has happened, I think. So I think in all of these works, he's leaving a series of clues. He wants people to think, what are the holes in the wall? Did someone really shoot those holes in the wall? Did someone shoot down the pipe? Were they that bad a shot? Did they miss? Were they trying to get it? Who,
And do you think those questions, because it's something I struggle with, do you think those questions need answered? Or do you think that would spoil it? Would that ruin?
I don't know. I know he thought they did. Yeah, he felt like you didn't understand the work until you stood in the room and you worked out how it all had happened. Yeah.
Interesting, isn't it? I'm aware that we've just over 3/4 of an hour. Can we just move through the slides? We're going to end on Karla's work. This is a very difficult piece of work to get your head around, the plywood drawing. We've talked about it a bit. Oh, yeah. His desire to stand you in a drawing, essentially. Does this one speak to you particularly?
Well, yeah, I find it, again, it's like it can't exist independently of the plan for it, the drawing for it, the idea and the concept for it. It's really conceptual. I think his work is just like conceptual art in space, basically. It's not like Kossuth or something like that, where it's just an idea, or it's just a written sentence or a picture. It's it's sort of conceptual sculpture in space, I think, and so his attempt is a sort of like, you can take it all the way back to Raphael, sort of like, and as far forward again, to VR headsets, can't you? It's perspective, visual perspective, the human desire to enter a picture, or a drawing. And so for him, I think, so he's trying to do that for you. You stand here, these are all the lines of perspective, not like the point of perspective is under the ground or something in the room. But again, like, if you can't just look at it and think, there's some nice little cubes and lines. He's asking you to get your head around it, So it's not, and then I think if you don't do that, you're probably not accepting his art or his sculpture. So he wants you to imagine where the point of perspective is. He's telling you all about it in his drawings, I think, and in his plans for this piece of work, which are in the show as well, which end up looking really like mathematical equations, and the dots and the commas, and but these sort of weird abstract mathematical equations. He thinks of them more like a musical score, like we said, and then he can improvise within that. There's nothing improvisational about this work. I think it's incredibly precise. He wasn't aesthetically thinking, where would these little cubes look nice? in this room and like asking someone to think, oh yeah, about harmonious composition or what that might be. He's actively trying to show you where the point of perspective is and how you relate to that in the room. And I guess you sort of imagine yourself kind of melting through the floor, and instead of, it is like a sort of backwards, instead of you entering the painting of Raphael or whatever with the amazing perspective that takes you into the Greek temple, the perspective's coming towards you, I think.
Yeah, you're right in the middle, but I think you're right. I think the point of perspective is down on the railway tracks.
Okay.
Or so up in the sky.
And also for him, I think a lot of the time he comes out of painting and drawing, it goes back to it a lot. I mean, that's a very sort of, him really trying to transform drawing into sculpture and give you a sense of what that might feel like, which isn't a very sculptural thing, I don't think. It's not a very material experience of the world at all. It's a much more optical, cerebral, imaginative one that is what is asked of you when you look at a painting or a drawing. It's more like that, I think, for that one.
I think you're completely right. I'm just going to ask Matt to just slowly cycle through. This is a work we're not going to talk about, and we didn't show, but I can talk about it at some point. It's a work Karla was referring to earlier, the cleaver piece, which she talks about not being about violence, but about meditation and putting the cleaver. And it's installed incredibly meditatively, as in you stand there and you whack the cleaver towards the wall between your legs, then you move on and you do the next one, you do the next one. We installed it and they all fell out, because our walls are not the right kind of walls, which is why we didn't end up showing it. We'd have ended up showing cleavers which would fall out all the time, and we were worried that people would run amok with them, so we didn't. Anyway, if we just...
You heard to tell the people of Edinburgh it's not a violent piece
exactly,
of work
yeah.
on a Friday night.
Tell our information assistants it's not a violent work. Anyway,
it's more like, it's like sort of martial arts or something, like the process of doing it, but it's like how much did the people looking at it know what the process of doing it is. But I guess they do through the drawing that's given to them, and he wants you to be in a sort of headspace between the sort of plan and the doing of the thing to try to sort of understand what it is.
So we've ended up very cerebral with him, I think, and we're going to just look at a few slides of your work to bring us back to the material. The previous slide we just looked at was Karla in Venice. This is details from Scotland in Venice, from Karla's installation in Venice. So we're right back to powder and granularity of experience. And then the last slide, and then I'll open it up to questions, is obviously the room we're sitting in, which I know it's really weird, but I think it looks like that oxide, the iron oxide work that we started with.
And this space is a good space to be in, talking about him as well, because it's really like a sort of New York loft or one of those sort of LA studios from the 70s, the kind of industrial, environment that he would find himself in making work.
We never got to do this, by the way. When we installed this show, Karla had like 2 weeks when the warehouse was made, and then to install this show, and we were in COVID, and we never got to do this. I never got to talk to you about this work in this space with an audience. So there's something I suddenly realized, I had one of those experiences thinking, oh my God, you've never been in this space talking to me about this work with the work here. So it's very nice to have that image.
I suppose, I don't really know what to say about it apart from, thinking about Venice, and that piece of work was called At Fault. This piece of work is called
Shade.
Waver
for Shade.
And I suppose maybe the way I would want to say, it's really hard to say like what really sort of differentiates me from him. It's like, obviously you can't step in the same river twice. As much as you're inspired by ideas or the sort of physical practice of previous generations, artwork is of its time, or it should be. And I suppose, like, when I look at them, not just him, but Linda Benglis, Eva Hesse, Suzanne Jackson, Deconstructing Painting, Sam Gilliam, Robert Smithson, all those, sort of amazing American artists that came sort of post abstract expressionism. Really, for me, sculpture, it's really interesting, and I didn't know until I really watched him talk that he didn't want anyone to call his work scatter pieces or installations. These are sculptures, you know, which is something I've always said about my own work, not knowing that either about him. But for me, obviously, sculpture is the discipline, the root, the limit of my work, all the things. It's really important to me, probably because Glasgow School of Art still has its, demarcated mediums, and we study sculpture or painting or whatever. But as much as I would sort of break out of that, it's really important to me to have the discipline of that. Sculpture is really, my favourite and sort of most interesting to me, because it is the medium that explodes itself into all the new forms via him and all those other artists. Sculpture becomes performance art, land art, video art, sound art through Bruce Nauman and Joan Jonas and Carly Schneeman, performance art. And so as much as I want to be like in amongst all of that sort of experimentation and all that raw material, I take it, I try and be right in amongst it, and then I pull it back to the pure aesthetics of modernism. So it's interesting that he did make some coloured felt pieces, maybe only one or two. I don't know how precise he was about what colour it was. I presume the iron oxide might have been important to him, but just because it's rust, really, as a rust colour. But for me, I use colour as a material as well, and it's really, I feel like it's no criticism, not a criticism at all. It's just that within the sort of going back to ground zero, dematerialising everything, how important it was to make the world anew, make these new forms, which I love, and to be so experimental that sometimes within it, it's tight, it has a tight sort of conceptual aspect to it, because it's really hard, because it has to be taken seriously, it has to win, it has to make its way into the art world and be accepted and subsumed. So that's really necessary, but I think sometimes I feel like what got lost in amongst all the experimentation was aesthetics, like real pure sort of high modernist abstract aesthetics that you get from, František Kupka or, Sonia Delaney, like some sort of like a really amazing sort of abstract paintings from Europe before all this happened. And so I tried to take all the experimentation and kind of pull it back towards really sort of careful aesthetics of form and colour and composition. And because of that sort of generation of artists, we can, feel like I can sort of go back. It's not a linear progression, it's not art history, obviously, and it's just Western art history. We're better at that now, thinking about world cultures and opening it up to what art really is and has always been. But I think that the generations that come before, you gotta smash something up. After that, there's always a kind of circling back. It's not like to bring, you don't have to leave it all behind, basically, is what I mean, through sort of experimentation and development. So it's not a linear progression as we know now. All this can happen. We can have all of that, and we can still go back and like have the pieces of abstract high modernism that we still want to have, as well as sort of postmodernism.
That's lovely, thank you. We could go on all night, obviously, always when I talk to you. Are there questions for Karla before I have a mic? And I think, Ruth, are you going to run around with the roving mic if there are questions for Karla? about her work or about
Someone there.
Barry's work. Sorry, Ruth, there's a question right at the back. Sorry. And thank you.
Thank you so much. That's been really inspiring and amazing, and I'm so honoured to be here speaking with you as a fan for many, many years since your early career. Something that I've always felt when I've visited different galleries seeing your work is how wonderfully innovative they are, despite the fact that so many artworks, you know, they're objects in space. So it's hard to be new, but you find a way and have forged that for us in Scotland. It's something to be very proud of and inspired by. I teach students in art school, so it's a real pleasure to speak about your work. But having seen you in other films, you mentioned Carla Schneemann and performative artists, insofar as your work has had some influence in this era, this sort of 60s, 70s, smashing it up, part of the artist being part of the performative aspect of the work. So feminist art, I think, really was the kind of key thing that I would say other people might see as happening at that time, but I know that you're, and I hate to sound that I don't mean to throw the feminist thing in here, but I know that you stand, insofar as your work stands for itself, irrespective of gender, and I think in this intersectionality time that it's irrelevant what gender you are, but I think coming from that era, your work speaks so much to women and women artists who followed you, and contemporary women artists and sculptors who see your work as, you know, you're a role model to so many people. So do you recognise that aspect now more as your career's developed, or is that just something that's part of the bigger kind of mixture from your influences?
Well, yeah, I mean, I hope so, and that's really lovely, and thank you, you know, for saying those kind things. I think that's why it's really important to say. Obviously, we're talking about Barry LeVay. Nothing happens in a vacuum. It's even really interesting to hear, you know, how he was really influenced by a fellow female artist, and I don't know who she is. I just know her name. He says her name, her first name, and then I tried to find out, you know, does she go on to, she was making these felt banners. I don't know who she is, but it's really, really important to say, you know, because for example, when James Mayer, who wrote this big sort of important book about minimalism quite recently, sits and talks to Barry LeVay and interviews him and says things like, oh yeah, it was just you and Carla Andre, you know, working on the floor. Just really important to say. I'm like, right, let me just look and see what year that Linda Benglis work is, you know, and when did Eva Hesse make that work, which is called what? The one on the...
Augment.
Right, yeah, because I knew, and you know, things like, you know, Yoko Ono, flux, she's cutting up material before
people in Japan are cutting stuff up.
That Japanese sort of performance group, and feminist performance art. I think when I was looking at Carla Schneemann, I feel like she comes out like a little tiny bit later, doesn't she? Really late 60s, early 70s, but it's like, what's 3 to 5 years or something to say that someone did something first? I don't know, it's all happening at the same time, but yeah, just think, I mean, I'm glad that you talked about, you know, art students, and that's it's really important, especially now, you know. You can imagine probably in I'm not saying that it was easier to experiment, I don't know, you know, like in the 60s and 70s, there was a lot of, like, you know, society was really conventional in America then, but it's really hard now where we are, and maybe things are changing again a little bit, but the really sort of high commercialization of contemporary art, and really the main sort of influence, even on what art students are making, is whether they sort of know it or not, is well, hopefully you want to try and keep your naivety as much as you can, but with like so many art fairs, the sort of rise of art fairs and commercial galleries, it's really hard to keep you want to not know about that stuff when you're at art school. I think you want to sort of not even, I didn't know, you want to not even know, you know, how you're going to live, or like we all thought that we would, we you know, when I was at art school, we didn't know, there was no commercial gallery in Scotland. We've got the Modern Institute now, we've had a couple more come and go. Apart from just those really wee sort of twee traditional ones, probably Edinburgh did have Richard DeMarco and whatever those things were in the Ingleby. But we didn't even really know like what galleries were or had been. You know, we were just looking at stuff in the library. I sort of imagined it would be like a life of poverty and you know, just making the work that you wanted to make. I imagine that Barry Levay probably thought that too, tried to hold on to it. Not that I'm advocating poverty, that's really stupid, I don't mean that. I didn't ever know that I would sell work until I did, and it was a surprise. And I don't know what his sort of commercial life was like, whether he made a lot of money from his work.
He did okay.
But it's just like, even the fact that the only way he got to make that work with the iron oxide and the mineral oils is because the Walker Art Centre was coming down. You feel like you want to have some more, you know, you want to have a gallery where they let your work eat through the floor. Because just to be able to really find what it is that you want to do, to be sort of experimental and try to stay true to some sort of creativity, not just the sort of transferable object that can sort of end up in an art fair on a plinth. It's all the same, you know, obstacles that we have to sort of fight against, because, you know, you can say that all these amazing works of Barry Levay, the ones we have the works here, but the powder works, the oil works, the rust works, like, they don't exist. I don't know if they exist in a form that they can be put out, but say they don't exist and they're not permanently on display in museums, and you can say, oh, that's because it's difficult work or he's a difficult artist, but it really, the real truth of it, it's because the art world and institutions don't really like art. Not really, you know, like, they're not really prepared to sort of let it live, and really sort of, in that there's all different kinds of art, obviously, but say like that sort of materially sort of wild and experimental work, you know, it's difficult. Like, institutions, they don't want it, you know.
They find it hard. And I suppose we are going to have to stop. I'm going to wrap this up now, but it comes, I think, full circle to why that exact point comes to why we haven't seen very many of his works, and why, in a way, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to me what you saw of his work in the physicality. The fact that your work has developed in kind of sort of nested inside some of his ideas, and some of his ideas are nested inside how you make work. And that whole notion, you're absolutely right, of the individual artist and individual creativity actually working against the institutional.
But I think now as well, in these times, it's like we don't want to lose it. It's very easy to lose, especially where we find ourselves now in the sort of age of the screen, and you know, and we can look at all the images all the time. I think, of course, I would love to see them. I'd love to be in a room with, you know, and
well,
maybe
it's heartbreaking that the deer thing isn't permanent.
I know, I wish it was, but at least they showed it, and the fact that they did show it means that they must know how to show it again. Yeah. Like, at least the powder pieces, I'm sure they will appear, and I do think he's having, you know, sometimes that's what happens. Like, he's died. You go your whole life. He's probably going to become a bit more prominent now, and there might be find a way to show more of that work.
I mean, this touches on a thing we haven't really talked about, but how do you show the work of an artist who's so present in their work when they're no longer here. And we've talked about that as a staff and in various films that we've done, and our audience will know that. I kind of wish we could have this conversation every year, you and I, sitting here with that and talk about what art can be and what art institutions can be. I think we all, as audiences for art, learn so much from listening to you talk about the work of other artists as well as your own. You're an extraordinary, generous force, Karla. Thank you so much for doing that. That was really,
Thank you.
Really wonderful.
Thanks for having me.
I've got a few housekeeping things. Yeah.